Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m, Wednesday the 6th of October, and you are watching Regional Wrap, episode 25. Regional Wrap, providing an insight to the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates. Joining me on this episode, water-wise, the Hughenden Irrigation Project, are my guests Jim Pruss and Reid. Jim has been the CEO of Hughenden Irrigation Project Corporation since 2018. He has 40 years' experience in the water industry, predominantly in urban water, in technical, managerial, executive positions in New South Wales and Queensland. Jim has 4 degrees, including science, engineering, management and commerce. He is an adjunct professor at the Institute of Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology, Sydney, as well as an adjunct senior research fellow at the Australian Rivers Institute, Griffith University. Jeff was born and educated in Melbourne, and while enrolled as an engineering course, he heard the call of the wild outback Australia. Journey's end was Hughenden, where he married and raised his family. Jeff is not only a jackaroo, but is skilled in many trades and has spent time earth moving, hay cutting, cane and cattle farming for over 40 years in the Hughenden and Burdekin. He has a passion for the development of the far north through the effective utilisation of our limited water supplies, and is one of the driving forces and founding directors behind the Hughenden Irrigation Project. Welcome, Jim and Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, I'll start with you, Jeff. If you could give us a little bit of background about yourself in your earlier days, because I'm sure they're interesting, and maybe just an insight in regards to the first conversations and sort of meetings or get-togethers to talk about something for water in Hughenden that finally realised, flowered into this vision for the Hughenden Irrigation Project.
Well, Bill, thanks for having me on. You just sort of described how I got to Hughenden. When I eventually got to Hughenden, I became a jackaroo, and I was there for about 5 years, and I was sort of going nowhere. And the fellow I was working for said, "Why don't you buy a little piece of land off me on the river and start farming?" And it was sort of his seed that was planted, and I did that and ended up with 1,000 acres. I had to go through lots of government red tape to get. But anyway, we started farming, and I was going to grow vegetables, but we ended up growing hay. And then expanded, and I ended up leaving him and becoming a farmer. Before that, I was an earth moving contractor, so I had a bit of machinery, so getting into the levelling and dam building wasn't so expensive. But yeah, eventually, as fate has it, you just end up where you are. And I became a farmer on the Flinders River, and there's not many of us out there. And over the last 20 years, I've been trying to get more farmers and go to meetings and get more water out of the river and get some development happening, because there's been a hell of a lot of licences issued with nothing happening on them. And Bob Catter came along one day and knocked me on the shoulder and said, "Come on, get more involved." And so I ended up becoming part of HIPCo, and we've been trying to drive some water development on the Flinders that actually might happen, instead of just another scheme that became a piece of paper on the mantelpiece. So yeah, that's how I ended up where we are.
Okay, Jim, your background and then how you got into it.
Okay, well, I think, as you said, 30 years urban water, wastewater, from scientific engineering positions, middle management, executive management. I've always had an interest in what I would call sustainable interaction of irrigation, agriculture, rangelands, carbon. I'm very much integrating, type of a person. I got involved with the Hughenden project through a company called Engeni Water Management, who were engaged to do the preliminary business case. And I was one of the project directors. And so with Jeff and the board members at the time, we scoped up a project and a plan. And after we submitted the preliminary business case, the board then asked me to come on board as CEO to help out with the rest of it and to get the detailed business case up and underway.
In the scheme of things, the Hughenden project isn't a volume project. Can you tell us something about this, the scale of it, and how it differs from just building a huge dam and then hopefully you can distribute the water far and wide, either through pipelines out from it or storage behind it to water the area.
Do you want to take that one, Jeff?
Yeah, I suppose, Bill, it's got to start with the water that's available. And when you say the scale, we're only going to take 30% of the water that goes past the dam site. So we're trying to be responsible environmental people. We're not there to rape and pillage. And so that sort of justifies the scale that we're doing. You know, there's a lot of people out there that think we should take a lot, but we're not. We're trying to be reasonable. We've also got to fit into all the government guidelines. You know, there is masses of environmental flow regimes and objectives that we've got to fit in. So we've managed to get all that together and come up with a scale of the scheme that fits every box that's given to us. And I think it's a sustainable project. It's probably not the biggest project, like you say, but it's like some people say, someone's got to start. You know, unless we get something going, it's the chicken and egg thing. I think once we get one of these projects up, more will follow, because there's a very unlimited resources out there that's very underutilised.
I suppose it's a matter of fit for purpose, and that's to say there's a lot of areas around that need these sort of small scale projects that they add a lot of value to the area. And I think Lakelands would probably fit into that category as well. What they want up there in a small scale holding dam, but basically to get them through that dry period between the wet season finishing and the delay to the next wet season. So it's a matter of fit for purpose is more the style of this project, is it?
I think that's a good way to describe it. It's taking the conditions which we see and coming up with what we consider to be a sustainable project, not sort of doing it the old way and just saying, well, let's build a dam, let's catch all the water, and then we'll get the people to come. It's doing those preconditions and fitting it into the environment, the geomorphology, the structures, the land, using gravity as much as possible, and making sure that we've got a real balance and mix of crops.
In regards to the technology that's around today, I'm sure it's really helpful having things like GPS and then satellite photography to see the contours of the land, so you can know exactly all the gradients and that. I mean, compared to how it was done in the past, with surveyors have to go out and plot around and get some sort of idea. There's a lot of technology around these days and satellite information to actually help all these projects before they actually have to invest a lot of money in the site surveys and things like that.
I think absolutely, yes. We've had the entire site done exactly what you're saying, had the whole site mapped for GIS down to quite a fine detail, so we can tell, you know, what level is right and where the water levels need to be. And, you know, Jeff and his colleagues always question and test that. I think that's right, this is correct, this is high. So that the on-ground knowledge in combination with all of that technology that you're talking about is the important part. So it's not just reliant on one or the other. And many times Jeff and another fellow, Clayton, have come along and said, look, I think you should be looking at this here. And it's proven invaluable insights. So not just leave it to the engineers with the technology, but ground truth it at the same time.
I think it's probably also allows you to not overbuild. Like, I mean, there's a tendency, like when you want to catch a lot of water, you build this huge dam, and this way you've got the methodology to basically be effective cost-wise and material-wise to get what you want and get the most out of that build.
Yep, yeah, I think that's also right. And as Jeff pointed out, there are swathes of legislation that we have to go through, particularly the golf plan. I don't know if your listeners know about, you know, the catchments and golf plans and the models behind it, but it's a stringent set of requirements that you can only take out a certain amount of water at a certain time, so you don't have any, you know, detrimental downstream effects. So that all has to be played into effect. Then you've got the all of the environmental investigations has to happen on the back end of all of those things. So pulling all that together, and then, as you say, right-sizing the dam. Don't just say, let's build a $1 billion structure, because what we're trying to balance here is the total costs and the total benefits. And if the total benefits don't outweigh the total costs, then you don't get a project up, basically. So you've got to be really careful and innovative in how you do that stuff.
With your background in earth moving and that, you sort of envisage a sort of earthworks dam sort of thing, and have an idea how it would be put together and built?
Yes, Bill, and I think just to labour on that point you were just talking about, back before we even got the scale right, we also did some fairly heavy market research on the demand out there, and we've been oversubscribed by 2 and 3 times with pricing attached. So it's not just if it's for free, I'll take it, of course. We've put pretty high pricings out there and still got, the problem we're going to have to do is cut down the farmers, not go looking for them. So that gave us the ability to then say, right, let's talk about the scales, what we can get out of this dam to the maximum the environment and the government will let us. But yeah, back to that second point, it's not going to be a concrete wall across a gorge type dam, that's for sure. It's, those big rivers flowing through little gap dam sites, they've all gone, I'm afraid, in Australia mostly. So we're sort of a bit more challenging, and it will be, the current plan is a clay core rock filled on the outside with the clay core in the middle type dam with a concrete weir to divert water in. So, but it's all been geoteched and designed, and that's what all this preliminary work's about, is to make sure there's no unanswered questions, that it's actually possible and feasible and nearly, ready to go.
Just as a matter of interest there, from the time it gets the tick in the box and say, yes, you can go, are there funding issues to be sorted out? And also, what would be the timescale for a build?
Yeah, the funding issues we've been tapping away at. We've been getting small amounts of monies to do studies and designs and that along the way. Bob Catter did sort of get an assurance out of ScoMo that we would have some money to build the dam, but the official number on the dam is not really, we're getting there close. It's always going to be more than what everyone thinks. That's the catch with building dams, because the goalposts keep shifting along the way with environmental and safety and, earthquake and bloody climate change. They throw everything at you that try and makes it more expensive. But we're hoping as long as we get a cost-benefit ratio that makes it look attractive, that, yeah, we'll be in the hunt.
And the timescale for build?
Well, I think when these studies are finished, we'll look back, but it's a bit hard to look forward. So I think if everything goes our way, we should be building something within 3 to 4 years. That's my guess, but we have to, allow for politicians dithering. We have to allow for environmental to be taking a long time. And, we've got Indigenous on board, and they've been very good and cooperative, but there is a lot of hurdles in front of us, but we've jumped a hell of a lot of them to get to this point too. I think we're over 3/4 of the way through the hurdle race. So
can you give us an idea of state government participation and interest versus the federal government participation and interest?
Yeah, basically the federal government's super keen to build something, and the state government's sort of cautious, but the state government holds all the cards as far as water licences and approvals and that goes. So we're trying to bring the state government along with us. And they're warm to the idea. There is a competition going with this water with other projects, so we've got to make sure we get to the front of the queue. But the federal government's more than willing to write the cheque, so hopefully, don't forget, this is not just a pure government thing. This is private people coming in and sticking their skin in the game too. We're sort of roughly looking at a funding model of 20% private and the rest made up by the state and the federal government. So it sorts people out pretty quickly when you say, well, here's some water here, but you've got to write a cheque, and those people, like I said before, are still lined up neck deep. So I think it's got good ramifications for the project, and it's a good demonstration to the government that we're not just airy-fairy wish lists. We've got people willing to write a cheque to get this thing off the ground.
We've got a state department called the regional development, manufacturing,
And water.
maybe agriculture, I think.
No, water.
Sometimes I just wonder how keen they are on regional development, because our regional development seems to be a bit curtailed at a time and doesn't sort of seems to be way behind our needs. So in this project, you're sort of hoping that the Fed side carries as much as they can forward until such time the check's written. So let's face it, most projects are 80% funded by the federal government, 20% by the state government, in where they can work it out, sort of thing. So it got to the stage where the federal government's willing to write the big part of the check. You think the state government will maybe lift its game a little bit and move forward on it?
I might sort of take this one if I can. I think the Department of Regional Development, that's only just a recent occurrence. They've renamed, which used to be a resources department, environment and water and natural resources, to regional development, because I think they do realise that there has to be regional development. They've actually got a document out there called a bulk water opportunity statement. I don't know if any of your viewers have listened to that. And that indicates where all of the water is out there, which allows for development. And they've got a priorities list in there. And I have to say that all of our interactions with all of the state government departments have been really helpful and informative, both the ministers, the director generals, the officers, all helping us structure this thing, because I actually don't think they mind a well-justified, supported project. It's more, they often get projects that are not well supported and not well justified and haven't been through the hoops. And that's their experience. So both Jeff and I and the board and the project control group were hoping if we put something up really professional, which ticks all the box, then I'll get right behind it.
The other thing is too, I'm still at a bit of a loss in why there isn't more strategic planning by the government to say, well, especially now coming post-COVID, we really need to grow the pie. So hopefully there's a reasonable chance that maybe regional development as a whole probably gets a bit more focus, because projects in the regions are probably the only projects that are capable of growing the pie. If you talk about spending, well, was a $5 billion project, now a $7 billion project, and will probably be a $12 billion project to build a Cross River rail tunnel. It actually doesn't grow the pie, if you know what I mean. It doesn't generate new wealth in that. Yes, it gives employment for the term of the contract, but then after that, it becomes a huge liability, because tunnels aren't cheap to maintain. Whereas you spend $5 billion in regional Queensland on either something that gives you more manufacturing or gives you more water to improve agriculture, that's a growing the pie experience. And they're the things we probably will desperately need in the very near future to sort of get us out of this post-pandemic debt that we've seemed to have accrued. With your background on water, do you see any other projects that are in the wind?
Well, look, there's a lot of projects in the wind, and as I said, the government realised that there is unutilised water resources out there, and there's lots of projects that are trying to access those and trying to get funding and trying to put them up as being exactly what you're talking about, Bill. Projects that will turn around all these regional declines and start to build the pie and get some more economics in. And it's well known that projects in this part of the world, it's difficult to stack up on the normal economic criteria. But that's what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing. And that's what all the other water projects are doing as well. We've all got to hit some fairly high hurdles. I don't know if you're aware, there used to be a government department called Building Queensland. Have you heard of those at all, that group?
Vaguely.
Okay,
so building in regional Queensland.
So Building Queensland was established to set a whole bunch of, here's how you go about assessing projects. And so we're following their guidelines to the T. And if we can get across and tick all the boxes, then there should be no reason why there's opposition to, this project and any other water project that gets across the line.
I did notice an interview from, I think it was David Littleproud. He was on the Mackenzie show here, John Mackenzie talkback show, and he was basically saying Tasmania has really got its act together, and 16 of the last 20 dams built in Australia have been in Tasmania.
Yep.
And I actually went through that list because there is a database of all the dams and when they were built and the capacity and that. And it's very interesting that a lot of those dams are actually private enterprise dams. They're not. I think there was only one government-owned larger dam, and the rest were smaller dams, capacity-wise, but they met the criteria of what they call a large dam. A large dam is any dam with a wall over 15 metres, or a dam greater than 10 metres wall height that extends more than 500 metres. So that's the definition of a large dam under this register. But it was very interesting to see how many dams they had built and the fact that they were initiated by private companies. A couple of them were agricultural companies. So they're obviously either attuned or have a direct line into Canberra to get projects, and maybe we just have to get better at that here in Queensland.
Well, look, I think the issue is Tasmania had a certain set of conditions and a certain set of criteria that they had to meet, and they've met them. And I think everybody sees that Tasmania is a great example of how some dams, some innovations being put into the dam space and constructed. And, as you say, lots of irrigated dams that's turned around lots of economies. And we're hoping to do very much the same up here, address our certain set of circumstances and come up with the right answers.
If we just go back to the Flinders, maybe, Jeff, you can fill us in on regards to the volumes of water that go through the Flinders, its source of catchment area and scale of its catchment area, and its outflow.
Oh, Bill, you've caught me on the numbers. I haven't got them in front of me, but I can give you another set of numbers that we're only going to take 30% of the water that actually passes the dam, and out of the Flinders, we're only going to take 3% of the flow in the Flinders. And out of the Gulf, it's less than 0.3% of the water that goes to the Gulf. So the water take of our dam is extremely small in the big scheme of things.
Is there other potential, not that we're trying to get more things done, but is there potential further down the Flinders for other people, or is there no one further down the river to sort of take benefit of water schemes?
I'll give you a little quick history lesson, Bill. Since the government started controlling rivers, there was about 100,000 megalitres let go in licences in the Flinders River. Putting this in context, we're looking for about 85,000 megalitres. So historically, there was 100,000 megalitres let go with virtually no actual action taken. They're all sitting on people's mantelpieces somewhere. And in about 2014, the government sold another 100,000 megalitres out. They got a cheque back for about $10 million for doing that. Once again, nothing's been built. There's a few little fellas like me out there that went and did something, but historically, that's another 100,000 megs gone and nothing. And now they're about to sell off another 140,000 megs, and I'm guessing it's going to be about a $20 million cheque again. What HIPCo is trying to do is to make sure that if it's not us, this actually gets something built. We're sick of sitting back watching licenses go out the door and nothing happening. The opposite end of the spectrum at the moment is there's a big competition for the water that's available in the Flinders. There's a lot of proponents that are trying to get this water. So hopefully this time round, it will actually get, infrastructure built and production happening, because there's no future in letting water licenses go out to people that don't use them. And that's one of HIPCo's undertakings. We don't want a water licence for water licence sake. We want a water licence to build the dam. If we don't build the dam, we don't want the water licence.
Well, I think the difference, I think down the Murray Basin, I think there's plenty of people who have got licences and aren't doing anything with them other than selling the water to someone else and making a huge profit. And I expect we don't want to see that in our neck of the woods.
Now, the big difference there, Bill, is that we don't want to oversubscribe water like they've done down south. You know, they're hurting the rivers because they've taken too much here. The percentages that I'm talking about, we're nowhere near that. We're just taking much, much smaller parts of this pie. But the parts that aren't assigned, you know, we'd like to see farming happen, not just sit on it and, you know, put it on the balance sheet and make the company look pretty.
With the government selling extra licenses and volumes and that, obviously they make money from it, but what's the purpose of doing it other than a bit of money in the coffers to selling water that isn't going to be used? You know, it seems a little bit strange to me, but I suppose the potential is there for the users somewhere along the line, but only if infrastructure is built.
I know hindsight's an exact science, and looking backward, it's easy to criticise. But in their defence, I suppose they had to manage and design and come up with all the plans and the environmental stuff and do the stewardship. So, you know, they've probably done the right thing, but it's just an easy line to draw in the sand now to say, well, let's look forward and let's change something that actually makes a project happen. We just don't want another round of water licenses, and in 5 years' time, you and I are talking and saying, well, Jesus, nothing happened there. We want to see a movement.
So, Jim, in regards to, all right, when the structure's built, I think it's this project's 9.5 kilometres of retaining dam. So, what's the distribution system from the Waterstook catchment area? Is that a massive lot of pipes and pumps, or channeling, or?
I can show you if you like. I'll just get a picture up. Is that all right?
Yes.
Just a sec. So I'll just share my screen so everybody can see. Okay, is that coming up?
Yeah, that's up.
Okay, good. So effectively, this is one of the concepts that we're working with at the moment. And I'll just, if everybody can see my cursor, I'll just sort of follow you along to show what we're doing. So this is the Flinders River following down here. Hope everybody can see that. Right, Flinders River all down through here, and Richmond is down here, and Hughenden is up here about 40 odd k's. What we're talking about doing is like a diversion structure, fairly passive with some gates and walls diversion structure, using the natural contours of the land to pick up all the water. And you can see these are all, you know, old lava flows, you know, basalt capping, and we store the water in here. The water then comes underneath the river, so that's about 15, 16, 7 metres high, the water. So it provides us with some head. We can get the water across underneath the river. Now, again, this is just one concept, but the green areas is the planned irrigation area. So it's not a massive set of pipelines, it's just 1 or maybe 2 feeder pipes, and then piped out to all the individual irrigation blocks at that point in time. And the original concept, if I can go backwards, was so same deal, the orange structure with the wall, water in the same spot, but was to go a bit closer to the river. And those darker green areas were able to be fed by gravity. That was a lift, a small lift of a pump lift, and that was another lift of a pump. But we've had some feedback that there's some fisheries issues here. The property owner would prefer us to be down this way. There's a bit of a stock route that we've got to do. So our latest version thereof is this particular plan. But we're also looking at another one where we can move this whole green area slightly closer for optimal gravity.
And what's the hectares there?
Oh, that's about 8,000 hectares or just under. And we're now planning on doing some dry land agriculture on the outside, which should effectively double the size.
So productivity-wise, what are we looking at? How many crates of avocados or mangoes, or what's the? I know there's different scales of pricing and that for different products.
Yeah.
But the general dollar value and amounts of the products.
Just let me go back I don't know that I've got the actual product cropping, but we've had an agronomy company look at all of these things, right, to make sure that we get the right revenues, the net revenues from the farms, that we're not going to affect the market, that all of these things have got, you know, commercial reality. And as Jeff said, like, we're splitting it into what we call medium priority crops and high priority crops to make sure that, and it's these ones here that provide all the jobs. You know, these ones are not so much in the way of job producing, and they're the medium priority ones, but these high priority perennial, you know, tree crops, as we call them. So they're all pretty standard stuff. And we're looking at introducing these type of things, right, into the market. Not necessarily those, it'll be up to the growers as to what they grow. And we'll bring cotton in if there's a broader cotton development, and there's lots of talk of more cotton going in this part of the world, so we could actually include cotton in here. But we're not doing grapes at this point in time. Flinders Council doing some grapes. You might have heard of their 15-mile project, which is slightly upstream of where ours is, and they're putting in a whole bunch of grapes. So we didn't want to, you know, cross our lines. And as I said, we've done all of the net farm margins, the market analysis, the distribution lines, the timing, to model all these things to make sure we get enough benefits to pay for that big infrastructure, which I just showed you, right? So wait a sec, where did that get to? Sorry, let me just flip through here and find it. So somewhere there. So, you know, that wall is a fairly costly item to get it there, and to establish these walls, the pump stations, the solar, everything, it's fairly costly to do so. So our products have to make sure that we get the net revenues to be greater than the net costs.
In your neck of the woods up there, probably can answer this. When we built the Ord River in West Australia back in the 60s, 70s, and that was a great idea, but I don't think they got an appreciation for the pests that come in that environment. I've driven for Hughenden and that, but is there any natural problems up there in regards to pests, or is it a fairly reasonable environment where you won't have to sort of deal with big pest problems?
I might answer that, Bill. I'm a farmer there right now. I'm not growing mandarins and avocados, but I am growing hay crops, and I don't have any dramas at all. It's an isolated spot. It is disease-free from a lot of those crops that have diseases in elsewhere in Australia. So it's going to be a new greenfield site that hopefully will offer some tremendous opportunities from crops that have been devastated by disease elsewhere. So it's a brand new start for a lot of those. Okay.
And maybe I can ask this, the wall itself, the materials, can they be gathered locally? You're in earth moving. Is it a matter of getting earth from one place locally up there to the site, or is there a requirement to get it from further afield?
Now, it's a very unique site. Jim sort of didn't labour on it as much, but the nature has built three sides of this dam for us. If Jim screen shares that thing up again, you'll see that three sides of this is a basalt wall. It's 70 metres high. That the west, the north and the east is nearly all built for us. We're just putting the southern wall in, and the rock that I'm talking about for the wall is in those basalt walls. It's all old lava flows. So there's a fair few quarries around now. I don't know if you've noticed the railway line going to Mount Isa, but all the stone on the railway line has come from these basalt walls. And there is sand in the river and there is clay all over the flat. So all the ingredients we need to build the dam are there. The other important part, I think, to mention is that this is not rainforest. This is no trees. We are not, all that green, there is no trees to knock down. We are open grasslands. So it's a very environmentally friendly sort of a spot to start fresh. You know, we're not going to go in there with bulldozers. To me, it's just an absolute, you look at that photo there, I mean, that goes dry for 7 months of the year and the cattle start to perish. All it needs is a bit of that water, and the Flinders River is at the foot of those hills you can see there. That's the height of that basalt wall. You're looking at the basalt walls that go on three sides of this dam. And we sit there in the wet season and watch the river kilometre wide, just flow past, go out to the Gulf, and then 4 months later, we're sitting there perishing. You know, it's the boom bust. I used to call this dam the shock absorber. That's all we're looking for, just to take out the boom bust cycle and just even fling things out for us.
So in theory, this project could be replicated in different areas along the length of the Flinders River if there was a business case for it.
Exactly. If you want to put it in numbers, like I said before, there's about 200,000 megalitres already gone. There's another 140 to go. So there's 340,000 megalitres of water available, already taken up in licences, a lot of it. But this dam we're talking about is taking 85 of that. So, you know, what's the maths? It's 4 or 5 times what we're doing could be done in a sustainable manner on this river.
And just on the scale of things, I think is the Mitchell River is bigger than the Flinders River.
Yes.
What's the comparison, sort of the water flow out of the Mitchell versus the water flow out of the Flinders? Is it, you know, like twice as big or?
Oh, I'd be going off the top of my head, Bill, but I'd say more than twice. I'd say 3, 4, 5. You know, it's a lot bigger, more flowing river than the Flinders. The Flinders is very variable, though. It runs for about a month and then it stops again, where the Mitchell runs a lot longer.
I've got a picture. I don't have that there. So this is what we're talking about here. And so this is the Flinders catchment, right? There's the Gilbert catchment. And while it's smaller, it flows a lot harder, a lot faster, and a lot more regularly, right? And so where we're talking about is harvesting the water that comes from really this part of the catchment, this tiny part of the catchment here, and storing it here and then utilising it over here, if that makes sense. So the point that Jeff made is we're not taking a lot of water out and we're trying to be very sustainable, which therefore means you look at all of these other feeder rivers there should be a lot more opportunity. It's more about what I said before, matching the conditions with the water, with the crops, to make sure that you bring all of that together to make a sustainable case.
So both the Flinders and Gilbert obviously flow out to the Gulf.
Yeah, that's right. Up here.
I'm just interested in the basement, the catchment area there, the basin. How hard would it be to get water from that catchment area south, or is that just not a needed project, or is another basin better positioned to provide for further south?
Oh, well, I'll have a go at that one. One of the first rules in water engineering is don't pump water if you possibly can get away from it, because it's heavy and hard and very costly to move. I've always been in the opinion that you try to utilise the water resources efficiently where they are and not necessarily move them. However, I'll say however, there are a number of, projects looking at the moment to do what you're talking about, to divert rivers where there's lots and lots of water to areas where there isn't water. And that's not being done by our project, that's being done by state and federal. Often you'll hear the term Bradfield or modified Bradfield to talk about those sort of things. What we've done, though, is just looked at our local area, and if any of those bigger schemes come in, then we can utilise the water if they decide to divert water up into the top there of the Flinders catchment.
Also, Bill, I'd like to say that I think the soil that's surrounding the Flinders River around our side is some of the best soils you'll ever get. I mean, it just doesn't make much sense to me to take water away from a soil that's sitting next to the river. It's got good daylight hours, it's got good temperature, it's just sitting there waiting to grow crops to me.
I did do a trip from Cairns to Georgetown, Croydon, Normanton, down to Mount Isa and back along Cloncurry, Julia Creek, Richmond and Hughenden in 2017. And I think they just were in the hot depths of a long drought. I think I was talking to the lady at the Moonrock Cafe in Richmond, and they suggested they were somewhere towards 6 years in drought conditions. Would that be right? That situation? Because they'd been destocking at that time.
It's exactly right, Bill. That's the boom bust that I'm talking about. I mean, we can go for a couple of years with nothing, and we've watched the year or 2 years before the river run banker. So that's what I'm talking about, the shock absorber. That's all we want to do is smooth out that boom bust cycle that we have in the climate.
So maybe your project would be a good guideline, is to sort of have these buffers at different places along where it's suited along the Flinders River, to give a lot more of these towns protection in those dry times.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, because even in the flood there in 2019, a lot of the cattle were dying from flood because they couldn't be fed, because it was the opposite end of the thing. The cattle are in the mud and there's no grass, and they were flying hay bales from South Australia. Like, it was, you know, if there was a farming infrastructure in the district, it would have saved cattle in the flood as well as the dry. Like, obviously when the drought, you know, there's stuff getting shipped in from Hell Western Crooked. If there was a local industry, it'd make, you know, make everyone's life a lot better.
Okay. If we just move on maybe to just a general discussion on water, because I mean, being the driest continent in the world, it's a perennial problem. You've obviously both been around the Townsville area and the Burdekin area. There's a lot of discussion, the Bradfield scheme versus, you know, other singular projects and that. Have you got any sort of position on the Bradfield or the revised Bradfield scheme versus things like the Burdekin Dam that exists now? And I think in the original scheme of things, when it was built, there was always a provision for it to have an increase in wall height by about 14 metres and a spill gate. So maybe Jim can answer this sort of thing. How do you think it's best to sort of evaluate this sort of project? Do you think there needs to be a sort of an independent body somewhere to sort of say, looks at things more strategically and sort of gives a Guernsey or impetus to certain projects, or it's just a matter of one getting over the line ahead of another?
Okay, so we've never had any sort of briefing on the Bradfields or modified Bradfields. So I'm not really in a position to, you know, say, you know, the benefits or otherwise. I'm sorry about that, Bill. I'm just not in a position to speak with any knowledge on that. What I would say, though, is I think this is what North Queensland Water Infrastructure Authority is set up to do. I don't know if you're aware of that body. It's set up as a federal authority in Townsville and Canberra. Recently, Barnaby Joyce announced it was moving to Bowen. And I think their role is to strategically look at the water projects which are up here and see which ones are best and support and govern and manage. They're the people, our federal people, that are governing our project at the moment. And I think that's exactly where they want to go. Not just people cherry picking, but saying, here are the big projects which we can get up, which will turn around the region and add value in a real and lasting sense.
Do they need to get themselves out there more then, to let the people and the promoters of various schemes, they're there and they'll look into these things and bring your business case to them, rather than we have politicians pop up and say, oh, this is the greatest project going and this needs to be done and we need to spend $15 billion over here for this or whatever.
Sure.
Does there need to be well, they need to take the mantle and sort of get themselves out there and be visible, and so people can sort of, if they have a query or want information, they can go to them to see, well, is someone speaking, you know, garbage, or, you know, or what's worth a Guernsey?
So look, I think we all have to keep relatively open on this, because our project, you know, the Hughenden project, was a group of locals. Jeff was one of them, and you know, they talked to the federal politicians, they got funding for it, and so a really good idea has blossomed from, you know, a very ground roots approach. So I think what we've got to do is have a combination of ideas from people, and as I've said a number of times, you know, Jeff knows this country as well as anybody, and will tell you what works and what doesn't work. So the guys on the ground do know this stuff. And if you blend that with a more strategic global approach, then you're likely to get the best outcomes. And I talked before about, stringently evaluating these projects, because you do, like, these are massive infrastructure. They're going to last 50 to 100 years. People's lives are going to be either, turned around by them. So there has to be this bringing together of the local projects plus the strategic version. And I think that's part of where both governments, both federal and state government, need to play.
We have a lot of publicity for the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund, and most people recognise that name and the acronym pretty well. So, is it a matter of this water authority being more well known, so people can sort of, I want some information, I can go onto their website and have a look, or if it's a group of people they know, well, that's the body to go and talk to in the first place.
I think if it's not known now, interestingly, since Barnaby Joyce has come on board as Deputy Prime Minister, he's announced a move to Bowen for exactly that reason, I think, to make it more in the area and in the region, so people do know that it's there as opposed to being Canberra. But I think it really needs to be one of these distributed type models where the people are out on the ground. And interestingly enough, we were out at Hughenden last week for a board meeting, and the North Queensland Water Infrastructure Authority sent out some representatives to be there on the ground to make sure that they interacted and understood. So I think they are trying to do exactly what you're talking about, to get out there, get known, be the champion of these things, and link the strategic plans with the grassroots plans.
Yeah, because I think it's worthwhile in regards to the people need to sort of have an understanding that these things there. So when we're going to go into a federal election, and there's got to be people sort of selling us all sorts of snake oil and that, and then it's probably going to be worse come to the state election. So it's probably really important that we have a source where we can sort out the snake oil from the good medicine.
Yep. And I think that's what those Building Queensland processes do. They say which projects get across the line, which projects are viable and credible, and so therefore they're the ones that should get the support. And it does sort of weed out the snake oil salesmen and the projects that have got more of a, less commercial flavour to them. So I agree. That's what the landscape's about, but you have to know how to navigate it to get it there.
Okay, then. If do you see with this project timescale for the build, what sort of money do you think will be put into the community in just the construction type phase, and hopefully, do you think some of the expertise that comes along in that part of the time can be sort of captured to stay in the area?
Indeed. And I think one of the things that you have to do is to build for sustainability. I think where Jeff was at before in the boom bust cycle was to take out that, those big drought periods. And we realised very early on that we couldn't get this sort of infrastructure in just with cattle and grass. We had to add the perennials, and it's the perennials that bring the jobs. It's that which causes the economy to grow. And the way that we've modelled it at the moment is about 2,500 jobs would come out of this project on an ongoing basis, some direct, some indirect, some permanent, some not. But if you look at Hughenden at the moment, about 1,000 people, Jeff, or what's in Hughenden yet?
Yeah, 1,000 going south.
Yeah, going south and going south rapidly, like lots of regional areas. And so what we're talking about here is a construction workforce of 2,500, an operations workforce of around the same sort of number. And if those people bring families, then that's going to really rev that township up. The original economics showed about $60 to $70 million of revenue or economic growth to be put into the area from this project, on an annual basis.
One of the things a lot of people don't seem to realise, and I find this one thing about Queensland, I don't come from Queensland, I come from West Australia. I was in the Air Force for a long time, knew a lot of Queenslanders in the Air Force when I joined when I was 16, an apprentice. And really, Queenslanders are the most parochial lot of people I've ever seen, in regards to if you come from Cairns or Townsville or somewhere else, it's sort of don't let them get any advantage of that.
Sure.
Do you think people need to understand that if someone does well and there's the improvement, it does well for everyone? Because the thing I seem to look at is, like I come in Cairns and that, if Mareeba does well and the Cape's opened up, it all bodes well for Cairns. And what that does expands maybe Cairns Port. It again kicks over and helps Mareeba and that, because now there's more services available for getting their products out and that. But it seems to be lost a little bit in regards to people sort of focusing on their own little plot and not seeing the interconnection between, well, in the case of Hughenden, you've got to run out from Townsville, Charterstown, Hughenden, Richmond, and so on. So it's a matter of corridors, and anything that grows in that corridor is a benefit to that whole corridor. And is that something we need to get through to people, that sort of, you need to get behind, if you're in Townsville, you need to get behind this project and make sure it helpful happens and things like that. You think there needs some more cooperation in that sort of setup?
Well, I won't speak on the parochial nature of Queenslanders. I'll let Jeff do that. I'm not a Queenslander either by birth. So, I'm a, what do you call it, a cockroach, a New South Welshman or something like that. So state of origin time's always interesting. But look, in terms of that regional cooperation, that's exactly how we're writing our business case, that this is a part of a regional initiative, and it should be part of a regional list, not just one. And there should be a whole series of these things, and not just water, but, you know, roads, electricity, infrastructure, schools, services, really start to utilise the north. If your readers are interested in any of that background, I'd refer you to the white paper and the green paper that were written by the government. This was a few iterations of federal governments ago, but they talk about all of that in great context about what the opportunities are in the north and how we should be doing them. So have a read through those, and that's been our lead really as to where this project fits in a national strategic agenda, particularly with, you know, climate change upon us and potentially the water drying up faster in the south than the north, and what we can do with the north in a very strategic way.
Well, I think there's always been discussion on the potential of the north, but gee, it's been slow to be realised with the dollars and the push towards it by the people who matter, and that's the people with the purse strings. So we can only hope that, like I say, I think it's going to be extremely important post-COVID, especially for the federal government and even all the state governments, to get projects out there that are actually going to grow the pie. I mean, if they're going to keep fiddling around with more housing grants that, you know, basically, you know, give an extra $25,000 per new house build, which basically gets eaten up because of the extra demand for workers, tradesmen, materials and that. So by the time you're 25,000, the price of the house has probably gone up 40,000 anyway. So and schemes like, you know, the old PFC scheme where we had the schools and the bats and that, hopefully this time the federal government will recognise at least a few big projects that can deliver for the whole nation and more northern and the regional Australia in particular, because that's desperately what we will need after this COVID.
I don't think we disagree. And what we're trying to do is put ourselves in the best position to say, if this is a project that meets with all the other initiatives, then get on with it and fund it. And we've got the project for you. So we can't, as you rightly know, we can't control a lot of those national agendas, but what we can do is put ourselves at the forefront of, here's a project which ticks all the boxes that you can possibly hope to tick. Thanks very much. Let's go.
If you've been around the Vertican as well for a fair while, so you'd have a bit of an idea of the potential for the Vertican to sort of develop as well if there's more water. You see I know there's been a group in council pushing for more water for, more storage capacity for the Burdekin Dam. You see any projects around those sort of projects and what they can deliver versus sort of just not doing anything? Because we've got a situation, I think, with the Burdekin Sunwater's talking about increasing the wall by 2 metres. Do you think that's a sort of travesty if they don't go back to the full original stage 2 project?
No, I don't want to get caught talking about stuff that's not my business, but yeah, I do agree with you, Bill. I think it's a travesty. I really do. I just think I've seen the economics of that argument, and to me, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Why would you have all that work pre-done when they built that dam? All those bund walls are up and everything's being done ready for stage 2, and they just haven't got around to it. But yeah,
I think they also included nearly a gigawatt of hydropower in it as well, and basically that infrastructure has been built into the dam previously. So there's a lot. It's all about potential. It's not being realised in northern Australia, and for our interest, in particular northern Queensland. And it's a shame we can't really get something really concrete going as a director from Canberra or Champion, meaningful rather than just a sort of ad hoc situation sort of thing, because that's what it seems at a lot of time. There's something happening here and then nothing and then something else and that, but hopefully we can have something drive the whole northern Australia and benefit the whole nation as far as wealth creation.
I don't usually take a lot of notice of politicians, but one said something to me once that I remembered, and he said, where we've gone wrong, we've got to stop building projects that cost money for the rest of their lives and start building projects that make money for the rest of their lives.
Well, the only way you can do that is stop building cross-river rail tunnels in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane and build multi-billion-dollar projects in the region. So it's a no-brainer because Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, no matter how much money you pump into them, will never deliver a growth, a money-making thing for the public. It will always be take more money off them in either forms or tolls, or it will be a liability for the rest of its life until it needs to be replaced. So hopefully the politicians may wake up to that and see, well, there's a potential for growth and money making and wealth creation for the nation, and let's start directing money towards our areas. I'm
not disagreeing with you, Bill.
One thing I'd just like to touch on, and especially when we're talking about water, but it is a bit of a worry that we don't have the visionaries we've had in the past, because coming from West Australia as a school kid, we always got taught about the C.Y. O'Connor and the water infrastructure that was built in the late 1990s and finished in the early 1900s. Basically, this is how visionary they were then. You had a fledgling colony that's only just had self-government in about 1890. You had this first premier, Sir John Forrest, go out in about 1893, I think, and borrow £2.5 million for the scheme. In today's term, is $40 billion. Now, remembering that West Australia only had a population of about 100,000 people, to go out and borrow the equivalent of $40 billion, build 2 dams, 500 kilometres of water distribution system, 4 pump stations to Kalgoorlie, and that's infrastructure still there today, and Kalgoorlie and Balga and Coolgardie are still delivering money to Western Australians' coffers and benefiting the public. Is amazing that those people had the vision and the intestinal fortitude to go ahead with projects like that. Yet here we are today, a country with 25 million people. An Australian government, collects more than $500 billion worth of revenue each year, and it still can't get a vision for our water and our future off the ground. I think it's sort of an indictment between the visionaries of the past and the people who are running the place now. And hopefully some of them actually pick up the game.
Totally agree.
Anyway, gentlemen, it's gone just 8 o'clock. If we'd like to just wrap up now, if you could give us a little bit of your final thoughts.
Oh, Jeff.
I'd like to just sort of say that what we're proposing is an environmentally sustainable, culturally sensitive, economically viable. To me, it's just a no-brainer. And I just hope to God that someone else sees the thing the same way as we see, because we've jumped a lot of hurdles. We've just about finished the hurdle jumping. And I hope that when this report we've got now, this comes out at the end of the year, and they take it up and say, my God, that's a no-brainer.
And Jim?
I summarised the screen, if I may. I'll just say, in terms of summary, I think our project is unique in it's got an expert client. Like we have really pushed it to get the right outcome. So we're very well governed. We're compliant with every piece of legislation that we possibly can be. Our demand outstrips the supply. We know we can construct the dam. It's all compliant with the Gulf Plan. There's room for other projects. It has positive economic outcomes. We have lots of jobs, both direct and indirect, and that there'll be flow to the local cattle and established perennials. Our sustainability focus is strong. There are no outstanding environmental or fisheries issues. We are working with the traditional owners to make sure that they get a socio-economic outcome out of this and not just taken from them. All our cultural heritage work is done. There's no issues that we need to do further. All the local landowners are supportive. We've done our costing and we are ready to stand in the market to get the water. So, but none of this would have come on our own. Like in terms of acknowledgements, I'd just like to say, like the founding board members started this with Bob and Robbie Catter. They're the ones who picked it up. Flinders Council, on board with us, our new board members, the former Deputy Prime Minister, the Prime Minister, Minister Butcher from the state government, Engineer Water Management did the PVC and our owner's engineer. Now we've got Jacobs KBR. We had expert agronomists and expert economics and financial people. That's the level of work that you have to do to bring this to the fore, to get the right people in the right place at the right time. We think we're there. So thank you, Bill.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Just one thing before we go. Having a permanent body of water there now, water is something is life-giving. Will it not surprise you in time? Actually, the environment improves with that solid body of water there, and maybe even things like our native fauna and flora will actually benefit in the long range.
Well, that's part of why we've got a sustainability focus, and that includes all of that, like improvements to the rangelands, making sure that we provide that environment. Absolutely. And sustainability comes in many, many ways, but that's exactly what we're trying to do, is not take away from environment or cause problems with climate. And what we're trying to do is improve, make better all of those indicators.
I just came up with another thought then. Is there any sort of migratory path there for birds? Is Flinders River system attract migratory birds of any description, or is it just the locals that are permanently there?
Okay, I would say there are migratory birds running through that region a lot, and if we did provide some water, they would probably use the water there. We've done at current level about a 650-page environment report that looks at all of those things. I can't remember a migratory bird section in there, but I'm sure it's in there somewhere. But I would say, like anywhere where you establish a wetland, the animals will use it.
Okay, gentlemen, thanks very much. If you just stay on the line, I'll just wrap up the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Jeff and Jim. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, I hope to have John Rossman from the IPA, and we'll be talking about the human effects of COVID up through the lockdowns in Melbourne and the variations that we've had here into our regions, and the differences that the public has endured in those two regions. So join me again next week. Good night.